and click to share my screen. Let's see. It's over here. Everybody see Photoshop?
See a white screen?
You see a white? You see Photoshop though, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So last time we talked about brushes, we just kind of talked about things that we had mentioned before, and I just wanted to make sure that we had a good basis for moving forward. So we came over and selected the brush from the toolbar, and we talked about all these options up here in the options bar. And I'm just giving us a recap of what we talked about before, but we looked at the brushes panel, and we talked about the different areas in the brushes panel, like size and hardness and angle and shape and roundness, I think it's called. And then there are the recent brushes and all the brush groups and brushes in your groups and how to add brushes, and this little slider at the bottom that you can squeeze them in here if you want, or if you're a little visually impaired like I am, you might want to see them a little bigger, so you can slide it over here. We talked about the utilities area over here where you can add new brushes, new groups, rename what you want to see, additional all these things over here, how to get more brushes, how to append brushes, find legacy brushes, and all those things. So it was just kind of an introduction, and we went a little in detail about how to add brush, how to create brushes and all that kind of stuff. So today I want to spend the first hour talking about some brush settings. I call them brush attributes, but I think they're the official term is brush settings. And there's a couple ways to get to your brush settings. And one way is to open up the panel, go to Windows or to your window menu and go to your panels. Remember how you open your panels from here. If you don't already have them open on the side over here, you can open them here. So brush settings, you click on that and it opens up your brush settings. You can also, I've got mine docked over here, so whenever I'm ready to use it, I just click on it and it opens up. But you can also just press F5 as a shortcut key, and that opens it up too. So it's real quick and easy if you don't really want it docked over here and you don't use it very often. All you got to do is remember it's F5 and you can open up your settings panel. Now in the settings panel, let's look at that for just a second. You have the layout of your settings panel. Some of you, when you open it up, you may see this right here, which is all your brush tips. And that's because you have your brush tip shape clicked on here. If you have that clicked on, then you can see a lot of the same information that you see in your regular brush settings here. The difference is that this is all your brushes, but this is as good as you get. You don't get to have a name for them or get them in groups or anything like that. They're just all sitting here. Now you can spread this out if you want to. These are all the brushes in all the groups that you have available over here. But instead of collapsing them into folders and groups, you see them all together. So to me, this is not real useful because I get lost looking for what I want, unless I only have a few brushes, unless I throw a bunch of them away and then decide to only bring them on when I want to use them. But for this is not real useful for me, but it could be. And the reason I say it could be is because you get this information down here. This information is the same information that you see over here, or actually the difference between this brush panel and this brush panel is that information right there. You look at this one over here. The difference is you have your size, but you don't have hardness and you don't have your roundness and your angle. So if you needed that and you were over here, then if you have your brush tip shape clicked, you've got that information at the bottom. So that's the only point, the only reasoning that I think you would want to have your brush tip shape. The other thing is down here, this spacing slider is kind of important. I use this quite frequently when I want to look at my brushes. And one way that I use it, and I learned this from Woody Walters, is you just pull this spacing over and you can see the exact shape of your brush. So if you have a brush like this and you have it over here like this, you really don't know what that brush looks like because this is a brush stroke that you're seeing. If you pull the spacing over, you get to separate that so you can see exactly which brush you have. So that's one thing that I use here is the spacing. And we'll talk about spacing in a minute as well when we talk about scattering. But we're going to look at the shape dynamics first. And when we get into scattering, that's when we'll talk about the spacing. But also on the side over here are all of your attribute groups or setting groups. You have your shape dynamics, scattering, texture, and all these things over here that all house a bunch of settings for how your brush is going to react. Excuse me. So with that in mind, what I want to do is I want to go to a specific brush that I created. And I don't know where it is in here, so I'm just going to go over to the brushes. And I know it's right here. It's just a square brush like this. So I wanted to use this because I think it's easier for you to see how shape dynamic works if I do that. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to squeeze it back down because we're not interested in all those brushes. And the shape dynamics and all these different attributes don't take up much space here. So you can also, by the way, pull it down if you want to, if you need to. So you could see, you know, a bunch of brushes if you want it skinny like that too. But you're not going to need that if you're just using the attribute groups and the attributes. So with this in mind, let's go to shape dynamics. Let's go ahead and get going and talk about what these things do. And let me change that back off. In here we have all of these attributes that are associated with shape. And when you look at this, this says size jitter. Well, what does jitter mean? Jitter, if you can just replace the word jitter with randomness, and if you say size randomness, then that's basically what this does. If I leave it down here, the shape isn't going to change because there is no change, there's no randomness for it. So if you move this to say 20%, there is a little bit of randomness, but not a lot. You can see that these right here are smaller, so they're not all the same size. Remember, shape, we're talking about size jitter here. As we move it up, we get more and more changes in the shape or the size of that. So that's what this is all about. Whenever I move it up to 100%, now you're going to get a lot of differences in the shape, or size, I keep saying shape. Okay, so I hope that makes sense in what size jitter is. In some cases, you're going to only want it to change a little bit. In other cases, you're going to want it to change a lot, depending on what kind of brush that you've created and what you're going to do with it. Now, notice down here that you have this picture. And that's where I want to go back to brush shape and move the spacing out because I want you to see what happens whenever we make changes. So as I go down, you're going to notice that the sizes stay pretty close to the same. Well, they're kind of rolling in, so you're not going to be able to see that because they're not side by side. But you will notice that here in a minute when we do some other things. Now, how do we control this size jitter? You have these controls here, and if we turn it to off, basically what that means is that Photoshop determines your size jitter. So when I come here, Photoshop is determining how that size is going to change. I'm using a mouse, by the way, because I wanted you to see that you don't have to use a pen if you're doing this. Now I have pen pressure turned on here. That's why that keeps jumping back to pen pressure. So remember, we had this turned on to use pen pressure. When you do that, it defaults this to pen pressure. So keep that in mind. If I turn this to pen pressure, it doesn't necessarily turn that on. So kind of weird that it doesn't, but that's the way it works. So if it's off, if you don't have a pen, you don't have a tablet, then you can leave it to the control to Photoshop, which means it's going to determine the changes of the randomness in the size. And like I said, if you want a lot of randomness, a lot of differences in the size, you move it up. If you want just subtle differences, then you move it way down here. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Pretty simple. The control, again, off means that, see, it says set the dynamic control for size. Well, if it's turned off, that means Photoshop is determining it. But you can also use fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, or stylus wheel. We'll talk about fade in just a minute, but let's talk about pen pressure first. Pen pressure is the one that most of us have a little bit of understanding of if you have a pen. So I'm going to use my pen now instead of the mouse, and basically I'm going to tap along here, and if I hit real hard, I get something. If I hit real soft, I get real tiny ones. If I hit real hard. So it depends on the kind of pressure I'm putting on the pen. Okay? Also do it this way, scroll it, and it does the same thing. Since I have the spacing in here, it's going to space these out. Now these two fall on top of each other because you have a small size and a big size right beside it that goes on top of it. So that's why it looks that way. They are spaced out. Okay. So with pen pressure, you can have minimal or minimum diameter, meaning that I don't want it to be any smaller than 18%. So I can come in here, and no matter what I have, it's not going to be smaller than 18%. I can go up here to see, notice it getting bigger down here. I can come in here and say 60%. So I can come here, and no matter what my pen pressure is, it's never smaller than 60%. Okay? So that's what the diameter thing does. And you think of diameter as a round brush. I know I'm using a square one right now, but diameter kind of is more towards your round brush. So if I just do a brush stroke, same thing. Okay, so that's how those work together. Pen tilt, as you may think, is how you turn your pen. So again, a lot of you don't have tablets, so I'm not going to really talk about too much. But notice as I turn my pen, notice how the size, I'm not even pressing down. Look at how tall that gets now because I'm tilting my pen. And now if I press, I get a real long one. So if I go straight up and down, I get a square one. Like that, I get a long one again. So that's what pen tilt does. It changes your whatever you call it, the way that your pen does. So it makes it longer and skinnier like that. Okay. So words there for a minute. So that's pen tilt. Now, stylus wheel, I want you to look, see this little exclamation or caution, this little caution symbol up here. That means I don't have a stylus wheel. That means that if I try to do it with this, it's going to default back to none. So if I come in here, it's just defaulting back to none, which means that I may as well turn it to none. Now the stylus wheel is as you can imagine, a stylus. It's a pen type tool, and it has a little wheel on it that you can move with your finger as you draw, and that's what determines the size of your jitter, or the randomness of your size, Okay, so that's what the stylus wheel does. So let's talk about fade. Fade is kind of different. And what fade is going to do, I'm going to change this to, let's say, 8. And what fade is going to do, if I have a minimum diameter, let's change the minimum diameter to 10. So whenever I do this, it's going to randomize for 8 strokes, and then it's going to standardize at 13. So see, now it's standardized at 13. So all of these are 13 because I said the minimum diameter is 13, and I want it to randomize for the first 8 strokes. So if I were to take this and change the spacing back down, look at what you get. You get this little tail right here on it because it knows that you're going to have the first 8 strokes like this, and then the rest of your strokes are only going to be at 13. So you're going to do something like this. So that's what fade does. And so you could change this. Maybe you want to have 20 and you want to have 0. So if you have 0 in here, what's going to happen is it's going to stop. And there's going to be nothing. So you stroke, and you see there's nothing happening here. So the first 8 strokes, it gives you that. Let's make this 25 again. So it's going to go 25 and then it stops. So these are on top of one another, so because I don't have any spacing, and it just stops because I have minimum as a diameter. So you're only getting 25 strokes out of this. So that's kind of the way this works. If I had a little bit of spacing in here, where it's kind of like this, and then I do it, then you get something like this. So you get the first 25 and then it stops because I have 0 as the minimum diameter. Okay, so fade is kind of strange. I'm not sure. Maybe you would use it for creating, you know, a teardrop or a tornado, maybe, or something like that. You could create those kind of things. So I could see that because you'd want something big at the top, and then, or a funnel maybe, and then it gets small and then 0. So anyway, that is it in regard to size jitter. So are there any questions about size jitter? Pretty simple and straightforward. Okay, I'll take that as a no. So let's talk about angle jitter. I'm going to turn this down to 0 so it doesn't have any effect. And I'm going to go back and set the spacing. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change brushes, and I'm going to get this little brush, which is kind of like a piece of hair or a piece of grass, whichever way you want to look at it. And we're going to go back to the brush settings and go to shape dynamics, and we're going to work with angle jitter. So as you can imagine, angle jitter would be angling this little piece of grass. If I don't have any spacing, which it doesn't here, it just goes like this. Looks like a piece of tubing or something. But if I have this opened up a little bit, you have a bunch of little things like that. So you have this. So if I turn on angle jitter and angle it something like this, then I get this. So what this does is it angles it up to about 16%. And what I mean by that is that if I change this to 50%, it will jitter all the way to 180 degrees. Notice that it's upside down right now. My brush is upside down. So if I do this, it's jittering 180 degrees. Up here, it was only jittering up to like 45 degrees. So it depends on how much you want it to angle. If I go all the way, it's 360 degrees. So it's going to go all the way around like that. So it's not much difference. 360 is not much difference than 180 because, you know, in this instance anyway, with this brush, because if it's, you know, 150 degrees, you can't tell that from 40 degrees, right? Because they're the same, it's just one's on one side of the axis, one's on the other. So I tend to like, especially if I'm working with creating a piece of grass or creating hair or something like that, I tend to have it around 15 degrees or something like that. And you're going to come in here and you're going to have things like this. And the amount of jitter in this case is determined by Photoshop because I've got it turned off. Okay, so again, if I wanted to, you know, notice that my brush is a little less than 45 degrees right now. If I wanted to change that, I could come back here and I would just grab this and turn it up, and now it's up to where I want it. Right? So I mean, I just want to show you that. I hadn't planned, but this is a 40 degrees. Now I've got it 40 degrees, but now it's turned straight up. I'm going to turn that back to the way it was. I just want to point that out. But if I wanted to, you've got all of these other different kinds of controls as well. You've got fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, your stylus wheel, but you've got these three additional ones that are a little different. So I'm not going to talk about these because if I did it on pen pressure, basically it's how much I press down as to how much it's going to jitter. So the other controls here, rotation. Now rotation, if I click on that, notice I have the little caution sign again. You have to have a special capability on your tablet to be able to do rotation. Now I could not find anywhere what rotation does, but I assume if you have a tablet that has rotation capabilities, that you have somewhere that it explains what that does. I think it has something to do with the way that you move your stylus on your particular tablet, but I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to skip over that because I don't have the capability to show you anyway. Kind of like the pen wheel, or the stylus wheel, I mean. But the initial direction and direction are pretty good. So this is the way they work. Initial direction means that however I go, whatever initial direction I go, it will stay with the jitter in that direction, regardless of what I do. So if I take this and I start going like this, and I go down and then I go up, notice that the jitter kind of remains the same. It's a little bit thin right here. If I turn it to direction, it follows the direction of my pen. So I go up like this, and then I go down, and then I go up. Notice the difference right here and the difference right here. It's actually changing the jitter of 45-degree angles to be in this direction. It's 45 here, it's 45 here, it's 45 all the way around. But here, it maintains this direction to do the jitter. So I don't know if that's clear or not, but you can see the difference here in the way it works, because this is a much more of a rounded type jitter, where this kind of looks like a sharp turn. And it's because the jitter keeps the initial direction that I was using. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it can be very useful if you are doing things where you're going in different curves like that, because it's going to maintain that same jitter. Okay, does that make sense? So we're gonna do some things with some of these here in just a minute, but I just wanted to point out that I typically use either pen pressure or leave it off. If I use pen pressure, then it's going to be kind of like this, where it has that 45 degrees up here. It starts out fairly flat and upside down. I don't really understand why it does that, but then it comes across here and does this. If I have that brush tip shape, if I have that closer together like this, it's going to be more like this. It's kind of like a thing you put on your Christmas tree, right? And that is controlled by the spacing here that I have. If I have the spacing all the way down, then it's going to be more like this. So if you think about that, your angle jitter by your pen, if you want it to be real close together like that, or if you want it to be separate, you have this spacing here that you can do. So then you have this, maybe not that much, let's bring it down, 22%, so you have something like this. So it's kind of cool the way that it works, and you can do, so many things with that. So back over here to angle jitter. So that's what initial direction and direction do. Your pen tilt, same thing. It controls the amount of angle jitter that you have. So let's just do pen tilt and see what happens when I go. See how it's turning? I'm being fairly still here. If I have it turned, it does something like that. If I go straight up and down, it does something a little bit different. See how flat this is as I have my pen turned to the side. Now, something else that controls that is your roundness jitter. And I'm going to turn this off so that we can see the roundness jitter. And the roundness jitter, if you look at your picture down here As I move that roundness jitter over, look how flat it's getting. That controls kind of how flat it is. So if you had a round brush that you were using here, it would flatten out that brush with this jitter. So it has randomness, how random, you know, it randomly changes the flatness of that round brush. It's not going to work too much here with this one, but if we have that turned on, let me turn that, yeah. If we have that, we're going to go like this. And that's at 32%. If I take it up to 100%, it's a little bit flatter. It doesn't really show it too much here, but it's kind of hard. Let me see if I can change brushes and go to round hard brush. So if I do this, oh, got to start all over. Okay. Each one of these, every time I change brush, I got to do it all over again. But the roundness jitter, we're just going to change it here like this. And you notice it made a little bit of a difference here, so it may not show as much. Space it out a little bit. Now see how flat this one is and how flat that one is? That's your jitter or your roundness. So let's just do 100% just for grins. Now see how flat that is? So see how flat my cursor is now? If I do this, see it's changing the size. So that's the roundness jitter that you have here. That's what that is. So if I turn this to fade or pin pressure or stylus or whatever, and it depends on how hard I press my brush, and press hard and then press soft and then press hard, and you get this different kind of randomness. So you can imagine the kind of brushes you can create with these kinds of things, this kind of jitter. So let's look at creating, well, let's move on basically. We have these down here at the bottom as well. Flip X jitter and flip Y jitter. What does that mean? Well, if you remember from your high school days or college days, your graphs, your X part is your horizontal. Yes. Somebody say something?
I said ha.
Okay. Your X axis is your horizontal axis and your Y axis is your vertical axis. So if you wanted to flip your X jitter, you click there. If you wanted to flip your Y, and all that does is flip this horizontally, so you can't really see that. So let's turn that off and flip your Y jitter. Oh, you can't see that either. So this is whenever I needed the other brush. But what it does is it just flips it to where it's basically the opposite of what it was. So it's hard to tell with a round brush like this. But if I go back, let's try going back and grabbing that one again. See if that will show us. Shape dynamics. And we have my brush here, and if I flip the Y jitter, it should flip it upside down. And you can see that now if you look at my brush, see my brush, the sharper part is at the bottom, and that's not the way that I brought it in. So it flipped my brush over using the Y jitter. So if I flip that back, now my brush is turned back around the other way. So it's you see that break time on my screen? I have a thing that reminds me to take a break every so often. But it flips it back over that way. So if you can't really tell on here because the brush is, the brush is long and skinny, but if I press the X jitter, it would flip it the other way. It's a little bit of a curve. So yeah, you really can't see any different. But your Y jitter, you can tell because it flips it upside down. So anyway, that's what those things do. And we're going to change our brush one more time back to the square brush. And we're going to talk about brush projection. The brush projection basically is if I turn my brush, see how it's changing its perspective? If I turn my brush a certain way, it begins to skew like this. So the idea is that it's like projecting onto a wall or something. kind of hard for me to do, but you get a different kind of perspective. Now I go down like this and put those two together and I get something kind of cool. But anyway, that's what projection does, brush projection. So if you have that turned on, you can create some different looks with your brush. Okay. Any question about those? I went over those pretty quick.
My
No
only
questions?
question is, what would you, I mean, I can understand this for graphic design and stuff,
Yep.
but in photography, what would you be doing with these?
Well, a couple of things. If you're doing composites like I do, for example, and this is straight out of Glenn Lewis's book, one of his books. I think it's his first one, the Photoshop Toolbox or something like that. He put together a composite of a elephant. And he went out and he shot a picture of an elephant at a zoo, and then he went out and shot a bunch of pictures alongside the road, and he put this all together so it looked like an elephant in the wild. But what he did was when he extracted the elephant, he just cut it out without even paying any attention to the fur or the hair. There is some hair on top of an elephant, by the way. I'm sure most of you know that, but you might not really realize it. And then he went in here and he created a brush kind of like the one that I showed you here. And then he went along and did his brush settings in here with shape dynamics and with size jitter and with angle jitter, and created it so that it would paint hair on the back of it.
Okay.
So that you don't have to worry about cutting out the hair for it.
Okay.
So you could do that. Another thing you could do is if you wanted to create a rainy day. I created a raindrop, and this is a terrible raindrop, so don't judge me by it. But I did it just for show, and you could have this raindrop. And now we're going to talk about scattering, which is the next thing. And if you created, I've already got scattering set up for this. You could create raindrops. I don't have, okay, it's no longer set up for it. I guess it went away. But if you create scattering, it's going to create a bunch of scattered raindrops, and you can come in here and add those to an image as well. You could also create texture brushes. You could go in and paint textures on top of things and use your blend modes to make those, use that to give it some different looks. And if you think about all these different brushes that are over here, for example, these eyelash brushes and these other kinds of brushes, it doesn't have to just be shape dynamics and stuff. It could be a brush that doesn't have any of that stuff. We're going to talk about color dynamics in one of these images or one of these meetings. Color dynamics changes saturation. It does a jitter for saturation, a jitter for hue, and all kinds of things that you could use. Like if you could create a snowflake here, and you could put snowflakes in a scene or something like that. So it's, as far as if you just want to bring your image in from your camera and you just want to get good exposure and good lighting, brushes are not for you. Brushes are for extra effects. Most of you, I would assume, know brushes just as your round hard or your round soft brush, where you go in and you brush in things. So you brush in a part of a mask, or you go in and paint a little bit over something with a color or something like that, but not with the dynamics that you have over here. So this is something much more special. You could also, in creating composites, you can take clouds and extract those clouds and then create smoke brushes from those clouds and add smoke to the front of your scene. So if I have a football player running through the goalpost, and I can have smoke coming out the side and lightning and all that kind of junk, to make it look exciting. Or if you just want to put a little haze in there, you can have a haze brush. There's powder brushes that I got from Woody Walters. There's splash brushes that you can use. Disintegration brushes where you can have people disintegrating on the side. I'm sure you've seen those pictures. So all kinds of brushes like this. It's a long answer to your question. Sorry about that. Anything else? Okay. That is basically shape dynamics. It's just basically those three things: the size, the angle, and the roundness. And what, if you just play with those things, or at least know that they're there. Let's say you buy a brush or you get a brush for free somewhere and you go, this is a really cool brush, and you use it and it doesn't quite work the way you want. If you understand these things, you can come in here and make just a few little minor tweaks probably and get what you're looking for. So if you had a smoke brush, for example, and you came in here and you tried to create smoke and it didn't quite do it for you, maybe you come in here to these settings and knowing that the size jitter, maybe it's the wrong, you don't want it to be that random of size. You want it to be specific sizes. You can turn your size way down here so it's not as random, and then come in here and paint that smoke brush and see if it does what you want. So lots of different things. Angle jitter, same thing. If you're trying to paint hair on the back of somebody's neck, or you're trying to put maybe afternoon shadow on somebody, or some whiskers or something like that, or add some hair back to the fur. Maybe you want to put some extra fur on a dog or something like that to give it a more realistic look, because when you cut it out it didn't look good. This is a way that you can do that. Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk. If there's no more questions, I'm going to turn off the shape dynamics and we're going to look at scattering. Scattering is just what it sounds like. It scatters things. And what you have here is a slider for the percent of scattering you want to do, and then a checkbox whether you want it to be on both the X and the Y axis. And typically, let's say you're wanting to use raindrops or something like that, or snowflakes, then you probably want it to be on both axes. And you may want to have, and this, by the way, goes up to 1,000%, not just 100%. So it begins to scatter quite a bit. Pardon me. So let's just look at this raindrop, for example. I've got them separated here using the brush tips, the spacing under the, under the brush tip shape. And if I take the scattering and push the scattering way up here, and then I say both axes without having any control except letting Photoshop do it for me, it just begins to scatter these all over the place. So I'm just doing a brush stroke all around. So maybe that's not exactly how you want them to scatter, so you can do even more, all the way up to 1,000, and just go in here and begin to go around. And you just kind of play with this to see if you get the scattering you're looking for. So all I did was I went around like this. I don't know if you could see my brush stroke there, but oops. But it just scattered everything based on that. Now, right now, I have the control off. But again, you have fade, pen pressure, pen tilt, stylus, rotation, the same things that you have in the past. So if you wanted to do fade, you could say, I want to fade 25. Now you have a count and a count jitter. So let's say I want to fade 25 with a count of 1. So if I click once, I get a fade of 25. Click again, click again, click again, click again. It goes up to 25, fades to 25, but it only counts once. And what I mean by that count, let me take all of these off, is I can count up to 16. Let's say I count, and when I say count, I mean the number of droplets. So I go 5 and I click once and it gives me 5. I click once and it gives me 5. Once and it gives me 5. Just like that. I can go all the way up to 16. If I make my count, say 10, and this is a count jitter, so I'm not jittering at all based on the count. So what that means is it might give me 3 one time, and 6 one time, and 4 one time. That's what the count jitter is. If I don't have it, if I have it at 0, it's giving me 10 every time, like this, okay? If I take the count jitter and move it to 50%, it's going to jitter 50% of the time. So there's, what's that, 6? And this time it's 10. This time it's 7. And I don't know, that looks like more than 10. So it goes like that. That's the way that works. And we're going to turn these off. And that's what the count is. The fade, let's just turn it, make this 1, make this 1. The fade is 25. If I go like this, see what it's doing now? It did 25 as a randomness, and then when it got to 25, everything's the same. It just follows my brush. So I don't know, it's just like all the other fades. So I could make this a fade of 5. I go like this, and the first 5 are random, and then the rest of them are along my brush tip. So I don't know what, it's just, that's the way it works. I don't know how you'd want to use it, but that's the way that is. If I turn it to pin pressure, excuse me, let's make the count 8. Count jitter is going to be 0. And I have my pin here, and I'm just going to go a little bit at a time and then a bunch. Wow, look at that. So it gives me a whole bunch of droplets. That's probably not what I'm looking for. So I probably want to take this down to more like 3 and then do something like this. So anyway, that's the way scattering works. It's scattering all these things. So you could use this for raindrops. You could use this for snowflakes. Lots of different things. Okay, so you may want the spacing to be further out. So I can push the spacing to 1000%. Now let's see what happens. So they're kind of everywhere now. They're off the page here because they're 1000%. If I come back over here and take this down, something like that. Now let's see. So you just have to kind of play with it until you get what you're looking for. You can also do the count jitter based on these things as well. So maybe you want pin pressure for the count jitter and the scatter. So if I do just a little bit in the beginning, that's the way it works. If I press hard, I'm getting more and more and more like this. So that's the way scattering works. Any questions on scattering? Lively bunch tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create some things with my brushes. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to do shape dynamics, and I'm going to put jitter, at about, I'm just guessing here, somewhere around 15 with 0 minimum diameter. And I'm going to not use my pen because I know that most of you don't have a pen. So I'm going to put this on like 13 or maybe 15. Roundness I'm going to put at like 10. Okay, so all of these are off. I'm going to leave these alone down here, X and Y jitter. And I have something like this. Now you'll notice in the tip shape, I have 10% as my spacing. Okay, and my angle is 0. So go back to shape dynamics, and I'm going to come in here and make my brush smaller. And my brush is upside down. Not sure why it's, oh no, it's upside down. Anyway, we're going to come in here and try to create a little bit of grass. And if that's too much, you can see the good thing about pin pressure is I can make it really small to really big. Without the pin pressure, I can't do that. So I'm going to take this down a little bit, and we're going to make my brush smaller. And we're going to come in here and just kind of create some stuff here. Now, this is really nice for grass. If you can imagine that you're trying to paint an image and you want to add a little bit of grass. Now it's, you would want to come in here and change the color, of course, so that it's either green or brown. So you have a little bit of deep green here. And this is where the color dynamics would come in that we'll talk about later. But you could make it green like this, and you could have that green grass in a meadow somewhere, or you could go like this and create your green grass. Something like that with a little bit of brown in there. Of course, you would have to have some other dynamics in there to help with that. But what I would use it for more than anything would be the hair that we were talking about earlier. And I would come in here and I'd spread this out a little bit more to be something like this, maybe even more than that. Let's see what this does. And so you can have a little bit of hair on top of an elephant like that. I could even take the angle and make the angle jitter a little bit more so that it's a little bit more like that. And then what you would do is come in and color in along here so that you just, or erase along here so that all you have are these little hair follicles up here. And you could do that on top of an animal or on top of a person, especially a person that's got short hair that maybe you made a bowl haircut out of. When you cut it out, you could add these little kind of follicles in there. And you may want to spread them out even more, and you may want to come around their head like that, and then just color out part of that so that you have some of those hair follicles. And you may even want to space it more than that, depending on what you're looking at. So you space it out a little bit more, and then you can come in here and do something like that. You get those little hair follicles. You'd want to have them the same color as their hair, and then maybe even spaced out a little bit more. But that's kind of what I'm thinking of, something like that. Now you could also, if you had, you know, a bear or something that has fur, you could also come in here and put these closer together, and come in here and do something like this. Actually, even closer than that. And come in here with something like this and put some fur on them like that. So that's, and it's, of course that would have to be the color of them. And then you would come in here and erase all of this underneath so that that's the fur that would be on top. And you could also make that size jitter a little bit bigger and come in here, and that's probably even a little bit better right there. So you have a little bit of fur. So you could you imagine going around the back of an animal like that, painting with this brush. Especially if you had, I'm using my mouse, especially if you had a pen tool where you could control it to go around. That's what I would use something like this for. And I don't have, I mean, I just created this the other day, but that's kind of what I would do with something like this. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody?
Yeah, it looks like one of those woolly worms you're not supposed to touch.
Yeah.
Don't touch that thing.
Well, it's when we get into some of the other things like the color dynamics and the transfer and things like that, we'll put some of these together so that they make more sense of how they work together. We're just trying to use one thing right now, which is the shape dynamics. And I could put scattering in here, but I don't know. Let's try scattering. I don't know how that would work with what we're trying to do. If I just add a little bit of scattering on both axes and just kind of come in here. Oh, that makes it look even more like grass right there. So that, not like fur, but more like grass. If you did even more, you got something like this, so you could have, you know, some hay on something or something like that. So it's kind of cool. You just have to try to add some of these together and see what they do. Okay? No more questions on this? That's brushes for tonight. Next time we'll talk about the texture and dual brush, and if we have time, we'll talk about color dynamics I've never used the texture of the dual brush, so that'll be interesting. We'll see how that works and see if we can kind of put some of these together and kind of build things as we go. Okay, we good? Okay, we get a little drink here. Okay, the other half of tonight, I wanted to talk some more about removing halos. And it's primarily when you're doing extractions, whether it be a sky replacement or you're extracting someone to put on another background or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I've got a list here of 8 different ways to remove these halos. And I've already discarded one of them because it just doesn't work very well. But I'm going to go over the others and kind of explain how they work and when I would use them and when I would. Some of them don't work well at all. Some of them work almost flawlessly every time. And that's probably the one you want to use, but I feel like I need to go over all the different ones. So we're going to start with this right here. This is my picture that I took, actually the wrong sky. This is the picture I took 10 years ago. It was, we were in, this is the Grand Tetons, and we were in at Yellowstone staying at Big Sky. And this is a picture I took, and the sky just doesn't do it justice. And by the way, this is, actually this isn't the pano I did. The pano I did was before I really knew what I was doing. And I refocused every time as I went around, which is a big no-no. And so I had a different focus on the different parts of the mountain. So I never showed it to anybody. But what I wanted to do is show you what happens here typically whenever you do an extraction. And if you come in here and look, you have these, oops, let me change my brush here. I certainly don't want to use that brush. Go to a softer brush. Okay. What you have here are these outlines. See this dark outline here? And you're going to see that all along here. All along here. So whenever you replace it with a sky, you're going to really see those. So if I turn this sky on, now you can really see those. And they're, you know, it's not only is it, can you tell that this is an extraction because the mountains are so bright, you can tell it because it has this line here. Now, of course, you know, I would never do one like this where these mountains are so bright and the sky is so dark, but I'm doing it just to show you those lines. Because I wanted to do one where this was obvious. Okay. So I'm going to start with, we talked about the multiply method last time, and we could do the multiply method again, but we're going to, you know, that one wasn't a big hit because it doesn't always work very well. So we're going to forget that one. But the methods that 9 out of 10 that people use will come in here and erase these lines. And when you erase those lines, you're actually cutting out of the subject. Now, we talked about that last time because actually cutting out of the subject is not always a good thing, especially if you have real detail information and you have halos on your detail information. If you go cutting it out, then you wind up cutting out your information. So you have to be real careful in when you use these kind of effects. But in instances like this, they work extremely well because you don't really, nobody really cares if you cut part of this mountain out. Nobody knows that was there. So if you cut that out, who cares? So I'm going to show you a method that I have been using for years, and I thought that I was so brilliant because I came up with it myself, and then I find out that I'm not the only one that uses it. But so I don't know how I figured it out. But anyway, what you do is you come in and you click on, you command or control click on your mask here to get your marching ants. Okay. We've actually gone over this one before, but I'm going to show it to you just in case somebody missed it out there. What you do is you do select, modify, contract. And what we're going to do is I want to zoom in here. Now I can't do it with this on. I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to zoom way in so that we can kind of get an idea of how many pixels we have to go. So select, modify, contract, and I'm going to do 2 pixels. So if I do 2 pixels, okay, so it's right inside. If you look here, you can see it's right inside that dark line, which is exactly what we want, and I just accidentally clicked. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to paint black on that to remove it. So we're basically adding it to our black part of our mask. So in order to do that, right now I have the mountain selected. Well, if I paint, I will only be painting on this side. So if I get my brush here, and I'm going to go to the default colors. If I get my brush here and start painting, I'm painting on top of the mountain because I'm in the wrong place. On the mask. I start painting over here, nothing happens because this is the part that I want to paint away. So if I paint over here, nothing happens because I'm painting with white. That's why. So where's my brush? Here we go. One more time. If I paint over here, I'm painting this away, and that's not what I want to do. I want to actually paint this part away. So I want to invert my selection. So select, inverse, or Command or Control Shift I will do the same thing. So now I can come in here and paint with black, and I'll be adding to this mask. Is everybody getting that? I kind of hope I didn't confuse people there because I was kept not clicking in the right area. But what you do now is you paint with your black, and you just paint that away. And the good thing about this is that you can be real selective because there are certain areas like this area over here that there's no black on. So you really don't want to paint that away because you're painting away part of the mountain. And you could if you're in a hurry because nobody's going to know really. But if you're really diligent about it and you want to do it right, then basically you're just going to paint away where there's black. So like in here and around here. So you just paint it away. And if you really want to make it look good, then you should probably also have feathered it. Now, I didn't feather it there, but I could go back and do that as another step. But see how it's taking that off? And I'm not going to go all the way around. It's going to take too long. So if I deselect, now you don't have those edges anymore, but you have some pretty hard edges in there. And you could feather, if I had done select, modify, and feathered it a couple of pixels, those would be a lot softer edges. So does everybody understand?
It won't touch anything that's on the other side of that line, the marching
That's correct.
Right?
That's
okay.
correct.
Wow,
yeah,
that's
because
cool.
So because that's because of your selection that you have. If I get over here. Whoops. Over here, this area over here is what I selected. So when I paint over it, nothing over here is going to be painted away. So if I paint right on top of that line, it's just going to paint away the part of this area that is not selected, or that is selected, I mean. So it won't paint anything over here. Now the reason it's not painting the sky away is because that sky's on another layer. So it's just painting away the part that that is exposed from doing the modify contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody got that? Okay. That is a method I've been using forever, and I still tend to use it, but I think I'm about to change because there are other methods. I'm going to do a little screenshot here and do, let's see, what do I call that? Selection. So I'm just doing a screenshot of that because I may want to do a comparison here in a minute. So there's another way to do this, as you might imagine. There's another 5 or 6 ways to do it. And what we're going to do, let's see. What we're going to do is, yeah. You may remember that some of you have been around since we started this thing, and you remember that in our, I think it was our second or third meeting, where I said, image adjustments, you never, ever, ever want to use these because they're global and they're destructive. You always want to come over here and do a layer adjustment with these. And that's 99.9% of the time is true, even though you see people out there all the time, you know, pros that do this for a living and everything, that do just totally the opposite of what I said. But I still say that this is the better way, except there are exceptions. There's always exceptions for this particular method. So the way this works is we have to make sure that we're on our mask, and then we're going to go to image adjustments, levels. Okay. And what we're doing here is we're going to expand the black part of this mask. And you do that by just grabbing this and pushing it down. And at some point, it gets rid of this black line, right? Well, it doesn't always work. In fact, this levels thing, I think works only about 30% of the time. But I wanted to show it to you. Now look right down here. I want you to see that it actually adds a little black line right down there. So I'm not really sure what's going on here, but this is a method that, and look at that, it took away a bunch of stuff up here. I was shown this method by Joel Grimes back in 2013 when I was at Texas School, and I didn't understand it. I go, what? Why didn't he just do the select and modify, contract, and all that stuff? So much easier. But now I understand kind of what it's trying to do and how it works. It just only works maybe 20–30% of the time, for me anyway. So I have a better method. And this is the method that I will use probably most of the time. And again, while we are on the mask down here, you have to be on the mask for this to work. Go to Filter, Other, Minimum. And minimum is really good because of two reasons. One is that you can move it by tenths of a pixel. So it's very, very precise. The other is that you have preserve roundness or preserve squareness. So anytime you have sharp edges, and this has some sharp edges on it, so you may want to do squareness instead. But you can do either one of these and play with them and see what happens. We have a roundness of 1. Oh, this only does it in whole numbers. Ooh. So roundness does it. Okay, well, I'm 99% of the time I'm using roundness because I'm doing it with people. But, okay. Squareness, if we do squareness, it's going to do it in round numbers or whole numbers. But look at it at 1 pixel. It's already gotten rid of a whole bunch of this stuff without much else. So then you can move it up to 2 or 3 pixels. Let's make it 2 pixels. And look at that, they're all gone. Now they're kind of sharp too. So one of the things that is recommended to do when you're done is to come in here, and you don't have to be real precise with this, but come in here with your lasso tool and make a selection. Oops, sorry, I got the polygon lasso tool here. Just come here and make a selection like this. And like I said, you don't have to be precise because you're on the mask, okay? And then go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and blur it by a little bit, just a little bit. And right now I've got it at 1.7, which looks pretty good because now those edges aren't so sharp anymore. They're kind of blurred. Okay, see that? And you may actually want to go a little less, 1.1, something like that. So now, with that method, they're gone. Pretty cool, huh? And that's what minimum is for. So that is my new go-to tool for removing these things. Now I want to show you something here. Another thing you can do that's really cool with this tool, if you're really anal about not getting rid of some of these parts where there are no black edges, then you can actually make selections and apply the minimum filter on those selections. So if you had this and I just wanted to run it on this part right here, I could just come in here and make a selection like this, and then I can do, make sure you're still on the mask. Then I can do filter, other, minimum, and it's only affecting this area. It's not affecting all this other stuff. So I could put it at 1, maybe this area. And we'll go ahead and make it 2 because, so it kind of gets rid of a lot more than you really want, but it doesn't affect this area here that didn't have any black, or this area over here that didn't have any black. So it preserves a lot of your image when you're doing that. And not really so important on something like this, but it may be important when you have really fine details or if you're doing it on a person. Okay, so that is the minimum filter. Wasn't that awesome? Let's see.
Yeah, that is pretty good. That's pretty neat.
So that's my go-to tool now. Let's see. I was going to make a, oh well, I was going to do a copy of it or a snapshot of it, but I've already messed it up. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to another one. This is also at Big Sky. This is where our resort was. On top of this is Moonlight Basin here. We had the clouds up above the valley here and everything. So anyway, this also has a cutout sky. So if I take this and I need to go back. Oops. To here because I wanted, all right, so I practiced with these and I forgot to put them back where they're supposed to be. So see, here's a, whoops, I even have the sky a little bit off. So let's take that and spread it a little bit. There we go. So you have this little highlight here again. And this is more common when you're doing something like this. And it's pretty simple to remove that, right? So we come in here again to our mask. And I'm going to do a, one more time, filter, other, minimum. And we're going to go to, this one we're going to do roundness because there are no sharp edges here. And we're going to go down to 0. And we're going to come in here and I want you to look at it as we go. So that's 0.2 pixels. And if I come in here and go, 0.5, it's not quite gone. And I would do as less as I could get away with. There's 0.8, it's almost gone. 1.1 and 0.2, 1.7. Let's go to 1.4. That's about right there. Maybe 1. Oops. Use my mouse. It's not too easy. Okay, you can actually use your up and down arrow keys too. I forgot about that, which is probably the easier way. So now it's gone. And it was that simple. So that little halo there is gone. And you got a little bit more over here. So what I can do, since I got rid of everywhere else, I could make a selection here, just like I did a minute ago. Let's see. Yeah, I need to add to that. Okay. And just do it again. Filter, other, minimum. And it's at 1.5 already, and I probably don't want to go that high. So right in here, and there you go. That's 2.3. That's hard whenever you use it. Okay, one more time. I'll use the keyboard easier. There we go. Something like that. So that looks pretty good. And now you've got a really nice little image here with a nice sky over this gloomy looking valley. Any questions? Again, same thing. All right, I'm going to skip over here. And we're going to do this one. This is my granddaughter from the senior pictures I shot. I extracted her, and you got this little line right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a different technique that's really cool as well, and it's one that you can use with portraits. You can, I mean, anywhere where you have delicate areas, you can use this. And what we're going to do, again, you have to be on your mask. Okay, we're going to go to the smudge tool. Now, the smudge tool, what that does is it, just like it sounds, it smudges. So it's, what I'm going to do is I want to make this black smudge over on top of this. Now, it sounds a little difficult, but it's really pretty easy. I've got it up here at 89%. I've got a very soft brush. It's going to be at 0 pretty much. And then you just come in here and you just kind of push it up like that. And you can come down here and you just have to have a steady hand, which I don't always have. But it's kind of cool that you can just come in here with your smudge tool, and it's nice, particularly if you have some real delicate areas. So really easy right there. Very simple, okay? And it's done. Now, of course, that's kind of jagged right there. It's a really rough edge, so I probably want to go in there and smooth that out. But you get the idea. Very simple. Okay? Any questions on that? You guys are easy tonight. Okay, there's a couple that we didn't actually do. One that I wanted to do over here with the landscapes. I'm going to go back to this Moonlight Basin and try to go back to where I was. And here, yeah, right there. Okay. So there's one that I tried to show you before, gosh, probably months ago, called matting. And I don't know if you tried to do matting or not, but it's Photoshop's attempt to make it easy to get rid of these halos. And then again, here I am with my sky a little bit off. So let's try to fix that right quick. There. Okay. So what you have to do though is you have to have a masked out image. So this has got a mask on it, so I have to apply this mask, but I want to save it, so I'm just going to copy it, turn this off, and then apply this mask. So you have to have the image with the mask applied. So what you do is you come in here, and we're going to come in here and zoom in so we can see. Get over here where we really have some white. And you go to the layer, down here at the very bottom, it's got matting, and it's got defringe and remove white mask. So we're going to start with defringe, and we're going to try to defringe 2 pixels and see what it does. Oh, wow, it didn't do a thing. And that's basically, I either get that most of the time, or I get where it actually applies black or something to it. So defringe didn't work, so let's try matting. And these are always, you know, something that you can try to do. But again, there we go. So you see it added a black line to it. Well, that's not what we want. So it rarely works for me. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong, but I mean, it's designed to remove this edge, this halo. So if you remove white, it's designed, I guess, to add black to it or something. I don't know, but it rarely works for me. But I wanted to show it to you anyway. That's the process, and maybe somebody else knows how to make it work, but I just can't get it to work. There's so many other tools that I don't worry about it. Excuse me. So there is one more, or two more actually, I wanted to show you, and we're going to come over here. Another of my granddaughter, and this is the original image here. And if I extract it out, I knew I was going to get some halos on this one because you've got the sun coming in over here. And if I want to place her on another background, then I'm going to have an issue with this stuff. So I wanted to show you a couple of ways to handle that. And one of those ways is to, well, what I wanted to do first, and this is not actually the image, but I'm already here. So we're going to add a texture to this, and we'll just do, I don't know, something like this, I guess. Come on, there we go. So now we have her on this, and actually this works out really well. Typically, what you would have that need to get rid of this right here. Let's actually make it a dark one. Maybe that will work better for our purposes. Yeah, it still works out pretty good. You know, when you're trying to do it to present to somebody, you can never get it. You always get a halo, and you always have to work with it. And here I am trying to get a halo, and I can't do it. So anyway, we're going to pretend like this is the halo we want to get rid of right here, even though it's just highlight on the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it around here. I like to paint left to right, so I use this rotate tool all the time. And it's over here. The shortcut is just R for rotate. If you haven't used the rotate tool and you do some painting, for me, it just makes it so much easier. So if you press shift and turn, it gives you this little compass at the bottom to let you know which way is up. The red is going to tell you whenever you are straight up. And I usually just go around here, and it goes, if you hold the shift down, it goes at 45 degrees. But anyway, what I'm going to do, we're going to suggest that you don't have this mask anymore. We're going to suggest that what you've done is you've applied this mask. You can't apply it, maybe rasterize it, and then I can apply it. You've applied this, well, shoot. Okay, you're this far along and you notice you have this halo. So you now can't use the minimum, or you can't use those other tools that we talked about. You have to come in here and do something else to get rid of this. Excuse me. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, I always do this on a separate layer so that if I mess up, I can start over and I don't mess anything else up. So one of the ways to do this is you can do a clone stamp. And clone stamp would be either cloning from the inside out or the outside in. Most of the time for me, it works better if I'm cloning from the outside in. In this case, you have a design here. So you have to be careful that if you're cloning from that design onto this, that it makes sense. You can't, if you had like cross hatch here, something like that, or a brick where you had different areas where the mortar is, you would have to make sure that you included those in the cloning. So in that case, it may be better to clone from this side out. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to flip it around, and we're going to clone from the other side. Okay, does that make sense? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to clone with darker color. I want to clone if what I'm painting is darker than what I have. So that's going to help me keep from spilling it over here. So if I clone here and start painting this, and I'm going at 30%, 50%. So I could paint at 100% if I wanted to, but I can come in here, and I need to have a really soft brush. Do I have it? Yeah, I have a pretty soft brush. So you can come in here and paint over and it is kind of spilling over that other area. And I'm not being real careful here, by the way. I normally would be a lot more careful. But you can see that this is one way. It's still a little bit off right there. This is one way that you can also get rid of that halo if it is after you've already clone stamped, merged stamp all of these layers, and you've already done a bunch of work and you can't go back. If that's the case, then this is one of the ways to take care of that. Now this one will be a little bit trickier. You have some real highlight here. Do you actually want to get rid of that? Maybe you don't want to get rid of that. But what you can do is come in here and get real close and try to paint this in where it keeps that texture like this. So it kind of keeps that texture, and you got this little bit right there, and I am kind of spilling over, but again, not being extraordinarily careful. You could also, if you have that mask still available, or if you wanted to do select subject, you could probably get marching ants around her to help protect against that. So now see right here, I would have not painted over, but that meant, that might have been part of the white that I was trying to get rid of. So anyway, once you have it back here like this, now who's going to be the wiser that you didn't have that before? So it's pretty simple. If you go, I just really messed that up, it looked horrible, you can just throw it away and start over. Okay? So that's one way that I get rid of any kind of halos around, is clone stamping from either the inside out or the outside in. One way or the other, it doesn't really matter. Another way to do this, which is, in this case, it doesn't really work very well, but we're going to do it anyway, is to create another layer. And that is, we're going to come in here and we're going to rotate again. And this time we're just going to paint a color. So I'm going to click on the brush and click here. I'm going to select a color that's very close, like right there. And I'm going to change my blend mode to color. What that's telling the system is, I want to paint this color on top of that, but I don't want to change the texture that I'm painting on. So there really is no texture here. That's why I said it might not work very well. There is no texture there, so it's really not going to make a lot of difference. But if I click here and I just start painting, now I should paint at about 30%, and that's 100%. I like to paint starting around 30%, so you can just kind of paint over it like this. And, it's not, the effect of using color as your blend mode is not really helping much here because you don't have any texture to begin with. Now, this is really soft brush, so it's spilling over, so I probably want to bring it down. Let's make it about 50%. And you can come in here. Now I made my brush bigger too when I did that by accident. So bring that brush down. There we go. And just kind of paint along here. And this might even be easier than the clone stamp tool, because you're maintaining any texture that's in here, which there is a little bit right here. And then if you wanted to, you could mask this off so that it just goes ahead and falls into the brightness there. So I kind of went overboard there, and with a black brush, I can paint out that. Still at 30%, there we go. And just kind of paint that out so that it kind of falls into the brightness. And then you have this, and again, who's to know that that was there. And I didn't get it quite as dark as I did with the cloning, but I could have painted over it some more. And again, you have a separate layer, so if I don't like this, I can use the other one. So that's what I do whenever I get further along and I go, oh man, I've got to highlight. Because a lot of times, especially with the composites that I'm doing, I'll do an effect, and the effect will cause a halo to come up. And I will have already put everything together and blended it and everything, and then I have a halo. So I have to go around and remove that halo. And by the way, Susan Richard is the one who taught us how to do that, to go around with the clone stamp using darker color. And if it's is a lighter color you want to use, then of course you use lighter color. So those are the two simple ways. And I think I went over real quickly at the end of one meeting about using the darker color and lighter color, about blending. So anyway, that's a way also to get rid of these halos if you have already combined everything and you don't have the ability to use a mask anymore. So any questions about that? Did I confuse you?
Always, we stay confused, I'm sure. I figure if I just pick up a little bit of what you're telling us and something clicks, it's helpful.
Okay, well, I'm a lot more advanced. We're doing a lot more advanced stuff than what we did a year ago.
Yeah.
So, the things that, we were taking it very, very slowly in the beginning, and we're picking up speed now. And for those of you that haven't been on these calls for a while or ever, we used to, we started out very elementary, and now we're doing some fairly advanced things. I mean, there's other things that we could do, but we talked about actions before, and we're talking about brushes now, which are very complicated. And then these things, and I think it was Robin that suggested we do this to get rid of these halos. And I wanted to just go over all these different methods because there's so many different ways to do the same thing. And it just kind of depends on where you are in your process. Do you just have a mask, or do you are you almost done and now you notice that you have a halo? Those are things that you can, depending on where you are in the process, you have different options, and that's all I'm trying to say. Let's see, do I have anything else? I had that one. This one I tried to do, but I can't get any halos to pop up. She was on let's turn this off. She was on a white background, so I put her on a dark background. It didn't matter. So still has no halos. Anyway, now hair is different. And if I were doing this and I have this hair, no, there's one that I didn't talk about. Ooh, I need to do that. If I were doing this and there was hair involved, like there is here, there is some halos in here, and there's some, some of the white is showing through this hair. It's a different process. So it would take probably a lesson of its own to talk about how to get rid of those. And one of the things that has been pounded in my head that I keep in the back of my mind is that you don't have to be perfect. All these flyaways here that have some of this stuff in there, just get rid of them. Nobody's going to know that they were ever there. The only things that you have to watch out for is you have a little bit of it here, a little on the edges, a little bit in these little loops here. Do you just want to get rid of that, or do you want to try to keep that and get rid of some of that lighter color? So it's those kind of questions that you have to ask yourself. And typically what I'll do is I'll go about it a couple of different ways. I either try to clone it in a little bit around there from surrounding hair, or I may actually even cut out a piece of hair and put it over there and then blend it in. So there are different approaches depending on what you're most comfortable with and what you have in front of you, what you can do. So hair is a different matter. If I'm doing something with hair, such as this one right here, if I were cutting her out, well, that was pretty straight. There's no flyaways or anything. Let's talk about this one, where you have some hair like this and you have some flyaways and everything. If I'm doing an extraction of her, I typically will worry about this edge and this edge over here, totally independent of the hair. So I'll do two different approaches, one for these edges and one for the hair. And you can use selected mask. You can use Topaz Remask AI, or Mask AI, I think they call it now. You can use whatever tools are available to work with that, but I always will treat those separately. So all of that being said, I'm going to, maybe I'll use this one. Let's throw that away. One of them I didn't talk about was select and mask, which is an important one because it's right there in Photoshop as well. And it's very easy. We talked about select and mask at one point. I went through the entire, attributes of how to use it and everything. But I want to be sure that you know that you can use it here. You can use it in these landscapes as well. But basically, click on your mask, go to properties, and you can select and mask. You can do it that way, or you can do command click to get your marching ants, and you can select it if you have the tool. Here, you can do select and mask from over here. So there's different ways to get there. We're going to get there from here, and it's going to open this up. And I have it set for certain settings to be here all the time. And it's only because, or the last setting that I had, it's only because I use pretty much the same stuff every time because I'm really only cutting out individuals. Now, if you notice, it did a pretty good job of cutting her hair out here without me doing anything. So her hair looks pretty good. Excuse me. But you have this shift edge, and this is what I wanted to show you. Right now it's at -72, so it's way over here, which means that's why it is causing, whoops, how did I do that? Let's go back to on here. I wanted to do that. Well, I did it again. So that must be a shortcut key. I was trying to go to my move tool so that you could see my cursor a little bit better. But over here on the left side, see if I can make this bigger. Oh, I can't even make my, there we go. Over here on the left side, you have some crunchy hair. So you have some of it that's disappeared. And that's because I have this shift edge so far. I don't need it near that far. So I pull it back and you can see that hair come back. So right now it's at +4 actually. So what I do with something like this, see if I can zoom in here. And you have, if you had an edge here, I will come in here with this shift edge and move it to the left until that edge goes away. Now it's going to affect the hair too. And when it does affect the hair, then I will do two different operations. One select and mask will be for the hair, one select and mask will be for the edges around her arms and everything. So if you look, you have just a little bit of white edge there. So you might bring that shift in just a little bit to get rid of that. And it works pretty good to do that. So maybe a little bit more. You just have to be careful because it's going to cut away a little bit at her. So if we do that, that is another way that you can remove those edges. So let's go back to one of these right here. And let's do this. I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to throw this away. And we have this edge, and I'm going to click on this and go to select and mask. And with select and mask, I have edge at -24, and it's not quite getting it. So if I take that and push it down some more, see it go away? So now that edge is pretty much gone. So you can also use select and mask. It's at -55. And I have feather and contrast in there too, but you can play around with those. But now this edge is gone as well because of my using select and mask and the shift edge. So that's another way, which is really easy to use, to come here and do that. It's about almost as easy as using the minimum tool, but I like the minimum tool a little bit better. One of the reasons is because I can use a selection with it. Here, I can't just select part of this and do it unless I actually do it before I come into select and mask. Does that make sense? that too much? Is it Miller time? Is everybody asleep?
Not yet.
No, we were doing Miller already.
Oh, yeah, okay. I should have known, right? Okay, so I almost, that's not even on my list here. But yeah, selected mask is definitely one that you can use with that. Now, it also leaves a little bit of a rough edge, but if I had used the feather on that, I could have feathered it a little bit better to soften it. But if you wanted to make it softer here, you could go in and do the blur thing like I was suggesting earlier. Okay. So let's see, is there anything else? I was going to talk about using blend if, but blend if is not, I'm not sold on it. I've used it a couple of times in some landscapes, but it doesn't really work overall. We've got about almost 20 minutes here. I could look at another image that I didn't have planned, but
Hey, Bob,
yes.
whenever you're, like if you use denoise, then it puts a lot of that halo differently around the pictures than the ones you've been showing us. Will it still work if you've like denoise the whole picture so your pixels are kind of different? Do you understand my question?
No.
So when I use denoise, like I'll crop a picture in and that always gives you a lot of noise. So like with the
Okay.
birds and stuff, but then
Okay.
it always leaves like a halo around the bird. And so I just wondered if you'd used it when you've used denoise to where once you've changed your pixels that much, if it'll still get that halo out.
I use Topaz's Denoise AI, and
Me too.
oh, you do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I had never had that issue with using that. You have the latest update and everything.
Yeah.
Do you use it? Do you move the sliders and all that to get the best look that you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've never had the issue with it um, leaving halos, but you should be able to get rid of those halos the same way, right? Because are you just talking about, so if you cut out a bird and put it in somewhere and then you use denoise on it, you still have that extraction, right? So,
Right.
so if you make your selection of that extraction and create a mask of it, then you should be able to use minimum to remove that halo, right?
Right.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
When I use denoise, it hasn't been in a composite. It's when I just cropped it. So the pixels are still, it's denoise really does change the way the pixels are. So I wasn't sure. I'll just have to play with it because I'm real good at getting the halo.
So, but I don't understand why you're getting halos if it's not an extraction, unless you're
Um,
over sharpening.
I crop it. I probably crop in way tight, and
Oh,
then I'll
okay.
change the image size, and then I'll use denoise. So
Okay.
I make the subject, and so when I do that, that's when I'll get the halos.
Okay. Well, what you're doing is stretching your pixels quite a bit then. And when you're stretching those pixels, do you use their gigapixel product?
No,
Use any kind of upsizing product like in Adobe, like in Photoshop, where you
no.
upsize?
I
Okay.
just do the image size and change it within Photoshop.
So in Photoshop, you're changing it from say a 3x5 to an 8x10, something like that.
Right, and making sure it's 300 pixels.
Okay. So when you do that, though, you're adding pixels because
Yeah.
so when you're adding pixels, it's using an algorithm to say okay, I don't have this pixel here. What's it supposed to be? And it looks at its surrounding pixels and says, I need this. So it's going to add that pixel color in there. And it just does
Okay.
that until it fills up your size. So it's doing it, but when you do that, you're actually using you are upsizing it. So if you're using image size here, you're using this resampling thing here.
Right.
And one thing I was told was always use the preserved details. I don't know why you would use all these others if you're always supposed to use preserved details. But this is some, if I'm doing it in Photoshop, then I upsize it using this preserved details too. If
Okay.
I am doing it, you know, Topaz also has that AI gigapixel thing, which does an amazing job of upsizing things. It doesn't save all your pictures. If you have a 3x5 and you want to make it a 16x20, you have a little bit of a problem there. But it does an amazing job of upsizing it a little bit. So if you may want to just use a sample of that and see if it works for you.
Yeah.
So, but that's about all I can say. With that kind of a halo, if you do get a halo doing that, then you may use this method that I was talking about, because it's the same thing. You don't have a mask anymore, or you don't have a, so you don't have a mask, so you can't use minimum, but you can come in here and use the cloning, darker color or lighter color, or you can come in here and use the paint in the color blend mode, and you'd be surprised at how well that works.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll play with that this week.
Okay. Well, let me know if you have any more questions or any trouble with that, and I'll see what I can do. Any other questions, thoughts, suggestions? No? All right. Well, that's all I had then. I hope that was helpful. Next time we'll go over those few more brush settings, and I don't know if we'll spend the entire 2 hours talking about brushes or if I'll come up with something else, because I pretty much have exhausted my understanding of how to get rid of halos. But I may do a couple of more just for grins to kind of help you, especially with some landscapes, help you see different ways to get rid of halos, especially sky replacements. So,
Are you one of the people that volunteered to do the editing on people's photos?
yes, I am.
You know, it might be kind of interesting to watch you go through a process of editing someone's photo like that.
And embarrassing.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, because I think I've mentioned before, you know, John Fisher, who I just greatly admire. And you know, every once in a while he'll post in a comment the original, you know, just the JPEG of the original raw file with no processing or whatever. And
Right.
I'm like, my photos look like that, but my photos that I process don't look like his photos. So it would be kind of interesting to see, you know, the process you go through or someone goes through to take a photo from, okay, it looks like everyone else's photo, to something that's like, wow, look at that.
Okay.
Because I think that's part of my problem. I don't know what makes it good or how to look for. I don't know what to do to make it pop like he does or Rajesh does,
Right.
or some of these great these people that really. And I just think that would kind of be interesting to see what you would do with another person's photo.
Okay. Well,
That would be great.
Go ahead.
That would be great. That would be very worthwhile, I think.
Okay. Well, I can try some of that. If I don't know that I want to use one of those in front of you guys, maybe I should, or maybe you could send me one or somebody.
Well, I guess the people that are in the class, if we wanted to say, hey, you know, feel free to use this photo in the class.
Okay.
You know,
Well,
and not necessarily the next time, but at some point, I think that would be kind of a, you know, here's how I see this photo should look.
okay. Yeah, that would be fine. Go ahead.
This Susan, I don't know if any of y'all are a member of the florography group. It's they take flowers and then they do Photoshop on them. And Jackie Kramer, she teaches classes at the Texas school too, but this Friday she's taking pictures. You can send your picture in and she chooses 5 flowers and she goes through and edits them. And I learned so much from her doing that. So I don't know if y'all want to join the group. I can post the group out there so y'all can ask to join it. But she's just wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Put it out
Okay.
there. Just a word though, that some of the edits that I do can take more than 2 hours. And because I may go in and I could try something and I don't like it and throw it out, and I may try something 2 or 3 times before, you know, I have my own vision of my own images, because whenever I took them, I was thinking in my head what I was looking for in the final, you know, the final picture. And so I try to bring that out, and sometimes I just can't make it happen. And so I work out something different that I hope is still, you know, still nice.
Well,
It
and
might take,
I wouldn't want you to spend like an inordinate amount of time on someone's image.
right,
You could maybe even play with it a little ahead of time, and not where you just start from scratch. You know, all of a sudden, okay, here's my image, Bob. Start working. You know, but
well,
even
that's
if you just took it and worked on a little bit ahead of time and kind of say, okay, this is what I did, and kind of show us
right.
the process that you did to bring out this or that or whatever.
Okay, yeah, but just so you know that too, that it's not, for me, my pictures, when I do my editing, it's not, you know, a 30-minute chore. It's something that I sometimes labor over for days, trying
Well, and I
to
know that's
tweak
the
it.
problem. You know, John and Rajesh, they go for, they'll spend 48 hours or 72 hours on one photo.
Right, exactly.
So, but
Exactly.
just kind of, yeah, I think it just helps to have somebody else's eyes to see, okay, this is what this photo could look like, you know?
Right. Okay. Be glad to. If somebody wants to send me one, or you want me to use one out of the group, whatever,
Yeah.
let me know.
Okay.
Anything else? If you have any other suggestions, you know, something that maybe I haven't done that you might want to do, then we can talk about that as well. I've done a few little bonus things at the end, and maybe there's some of those that we want to spend more time on. I was working yesterday on something for the Rockwell Girls poster, and I needed to bend something, and I happened to think of Puppet Warp, and I haven't used Puppet Warp very much, but boy, was it a lifesaver in using it for what I was using it for. So there are little things like that that you go, what the heck is Puppet Warp? Well, I can show you some of those things.
Yeah,
But
that'd be good.
if there's something that you want specifically, and remember that Photoshop really should be for anything you can't do in Lightroom or Camera Raw. It should be for all those extra things. If you're looking in Photoshop to do your exposure correction, you really should have done that over in Lightroom, unless you applied something in Photoshop that made it change. So just remember that too. But let me know if there's something special you want to do in addition to the retouch of somebody else's picture.
Bob,
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you something that I've taken to doing and get your comment on it.
Okay. Speak up just a little bit, please.
Pardon me?
I said I could just barely hear you.
Oh, I'd like you to comment on, I would like to tell you something I've taken to doing and get your comment on it.
Okay.
So I'll take a raw image, pull it into ACR. I'll adjust do lens correction, and then go directly to Photoshop.
Okay.
And typically, I will immediately duplicate the layer, convert it to a smart object,
Okay.
and then do an ACR filter on it.
Okay.
And the ACR filter do all the things that I would normally have done in ACR. And the reason I've done that is because then, since it's a smart object, if I don't like what I've done later on, I can go back and change it. Whereas if I modify it in ACR, then go to Photoshop, I can't change it.
You can if you take it into Photoshop as a smart object. which is what I do. So when you go into ACR, let me show you what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Oh,
And,
okay.
it's essentially the same thing I'm doing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's effectively the same thing. It's just that you're going, you're an extra step there.
Yeah.
And it's not the same thing you're doing, because whenever you first go into ACR, you can make your changes there and then go into Photoshop. And then if you decide that you want something changed, you can always go back to your original ACR and make your changes.
Well, yeah, but then you lose what you did in Photoshop.
No, not if you do it with smart objects, or if you do it with non-destructive tools. I mean, it's not any different than what you were just telling me.
Yeah,
Right.
a problem with smart objects is that once you have a smart object in your image, you can't do stuff like perspective correction, like on architecture.
You can't do what?
Well, like on architecture, where your lines go in at the top or in at the bottom.
How about transform?
Pardon me?
Transform? We
So-
gotta straighten up the perspective.
Yeah, using perspective crop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can use that perspective in ACR though. So
And
yeah. So if you go, let me show you. Let me open up an image. Let's see. Let's go in here. Come on. Let's go to Missouri. We'll go to we'll just grab I have no idea what this picture is. Oh, it's pretty dark. Okay, this is going to open up in ACR. Hopefully, yeah. Okay, so here I am in Camera Raw. Okay, anything you do in here, whenever I take it to Photoshop, it's going to be in a smart object, right?
Yeah, because you've got it set that way. I don't.
Okay. And the reason I have it set that way is because I can always come back, and all the settings that I have in here, I can change.
Yeah.
If you do it your way, you only made one. What did you say you made a change to? You made a change to something.
Lens correction, because you can't
Lens
do
correction.
that once you're in the Photoshop.
Right. But if you do that, the difference is in what you're doing. For one thing, you can't really use your white balance, because now your white balance is not dependent on your raw file anymore. It's dependent on your Photoshop file.
Well, that's
So-
true, but it still works.
All you have here, you don't have this, you can't change your value. All you can do is move the slider back and forth. That's one thing. But any changes that you make here, you can always come back to, because you open it as a smart object. And you were talking about the perspective tool. You have a perspective tool right here where it says geometry. You can, you know about this?
No, I've never been there.
Okay, geometry right here, and you can select, do you want it to automatically try to change it for you? So there it did it automatically, and maybe it didn't do it quite right. So you can do horizontal, you can do vertical, or you can do different things here. But I usually try to use this one, and there's actually a tool up here for it, or there used to be. Since they've changed this, I lose things.
Yeah, I'm not real fond of the new look.
But you can select this last one, then you just come in here and draw your lines,
Oh, look at you.
oh yeah,
select what you want, and it will begin to straighten it up for you.
Oh,
it's time for I'll be damned.
okay.
See?
For that, excuse me before I pour a drink. Thank you.
Sure. So you can do that in here. See, worth a question. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Just slap a dummy dart on my forehead.
I have one comment.
No, it's just, if you don't know, you don't know. You know.
You're not on the latest ACR, are you?
Yes, I am.
Well, my question is crazy. I have open object. See, you've got cancel, done, open.
Hmm.
I now have open, done, cancel.
Okay.
You on a PC or a Mac?
PC.
Okay, he's
Okay.
on a Mac. It could be just.
Mine's
No, it's the difference is you don't have it to open automatically as a smart object.
Ah,
You got it-
okay.
if you click down here, you can set it to open automatically as a smart object somewhere in here.
Okay.
And when you
Yeah.
do right here, this checkbox. When you do that, it has the open object over here.
Okay.
By the
So that's the
way,
difference.
let me vent. Does anybody else have the problem where about every 2 days ACR reverts back to the defaults and you have to reset your settings? Ah! And it's been that way ever since they changed the interface over on the right.
I don't use ACR, so I can't answer.
Hmm.
Okay.
No, I've not had any issues with that.
It's most disturbing. I'll pull a photo in to ACR. Raw images go automatically into ACR, and I'll come in and it says something like, well, I don't remember, but the only option is go back to the default.
Oh, no, I've not had
And
that
then I have
issue.
to go up there to settings and reset everything I have set. And I keep thinking they're going to fix it, and they keep not fixing it. Anyhow, that's nice.
Another thing too with ACR that you may not know is you can create presets in here too. And I have a preset that I use for landscape and portraits. So if it's a landscape, I'll use this landscape default. And basically all that really does is it sets so that it uses my camera landscape profile instead of Adobe's. And it also sets the, where is it? The optics for remove chromatic aberration and user profile correction. And I think it does something else. I can't remember what else it is. But it sets those things so that I automatically have it. And I also use this auto. Now, for a long time, I did not use this, but I use it now because and in fact, that's one of them that it does, that default. If I use this, it gets it like 90% where I want to go. So I can come in here now. These all happen because I have this set up to click on auto. So it makes this change right here. And I can come in here now, and if I don't like it, I can come in here, and I usually don't. I can just make some tweaks to it to open up the shadows, maybe right here, something like that. And I always add sharpening to it. But just so you know, that's kind of how you can do that in ACR too. You can create presets in here just like you can in Lightroom. Maybe.
All of that. Mine is set on auto, but it doesn't show. It's all set to neutral. I think.
So if you click on auto, does it change all your sliders?
Come on, open.
It does on mine. It does everything but texture and clarity and dehaze.
Okay.
And I use auto most of the time.
Yeah, because it gets you started and it does a really good job of getting everything started. And so whenever I'm in RAW, I typically only change a few things. Sometimes I'll, just like you said, sometimes I'll use texture and clarity, but I'm almost always will adjust the sharpening as well. And that's about all I do, unless there's something specific in here that I want to do. And then I'll use the adjustment brush or something like that to do something specific. But I mean, most of the time I'm almost there whenever I do this. And if I ever get over to Photoshop, like I said, and I don't like it, I can always come back. I do all of my dodging and burning in Photoshop. You could do it over here. I just don't like the tools that are over here. So I mean, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. No, never mind. I thought it was not. I thought it was always on auto, but what you have to do is click on auto.
Yeah, but you can set a preset to put it on auto. And if that's something you want me to go over, I'll be glad to do that at a future time. Now, remember that there's only a few of us that use ACR. Most everybody uses Lightroom. But I could spend a few minutes just talking about how to create a preset in here.
Well, for my part, as I said, ACR's defaults reset about every 2 days.
I would get in touch with Adobe about that because that's not happening to me.
It's been happening ever since they, if you remember when they changed the interface on the right?
Yeah, a few months
Yeah,
ago. Yeah,
it's been doing that ever since then.
yeah. I would get in touch with them because that is not right. And what here, I'll tell you what they're going to tell you to do. They're going to tell you to uninstall and reinstall Photoshop. But hopefully they'll have you try a few other things first.
Well, that means reset every darn thing.
Well, but you can save those things. So if you have any,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
workspace and all that kind of stuff, you can save all that. And then when you restore it, you can try it back
Mhm.
again.
Yeah,
But,
maybe you can do that.
that seems to be their standard answer, but I would get in touch with them anyway. And I like to chat with them because then you can say nasty things and you don't have to say it to their face. You know?
I wish you could do that with Facebook.
No, it's bad enough the way it is.
All right, anything else? That was good discussion. Thank you for bringing that up. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
All right.
Bye.